Well, hi there, and welcome back to the Pastors on Porn podcast. And it's now January 2021 as we all wait for the vaccine. Let me just catch you up a little bit of what I'm doing. I am now back speaking, back in the pulpit. I took 3 months off. If you know where I've been at, I ended up handing over the senior leadership to a great couple, 25, 30 years younger than me. And they're now taking over the key or the senior leadership and doing, I'm not on the elders team, any of that. And I passed that over to them, took 3 months off. And over these last 3 months, of course, I've been working on developing material and podcasts and coaching, both individual and also group coaching. And also been going back into the high schools on Thursday and Friday to be a substitute high school teacher. It's good money, and I don't have any homework to do. And a little weird after 17, 18 years of being out of the school system, but it's kind of like riding the bike. Kids are still kids, a lot more cell phones around, but it's still what it is. And grade 7 and 8s are still immature, and but it's all working out. But now that January's here, the plan was for me to step back into my speaking rotation. So I'll be speaking usually twice a month or once a month. And we've been doing a series on the Sermon on the Mount called This Is Us. So this last Sunday I spoke on anger. And the week after next, I get to speak on lust. I don't know anything about that, but I'll be speaking on lust. And then the week after that, which is Valentine's Day, I've been given the topic of Jesus teaching on divorce. So Megan has left me some fun topics there. So you know what? And even speaking this last Sunday was, again, that's another little bit like riding the bike. You get back at it, and it's kind of weird because we're pretty much doing it to an empty house. Everything's online, YouTube and Facebook because of COVID. But you know what? Looking forward to it. And again, it was fun to be back speaking. Well, today I want to kind of lean into a topic that I've been thinking about. And I just kind of want to riff on it for a while because it's this whole idea of why pastors fail to lean into this whole topic of sexuality in the church. In particular, sexual brokenness. I mean, any stats, the Barna porn phenomena just talked about how many adults, how many people are struggling with it. I heard recently that over 25% now of women under the age of 30 talk about having a struggle with online pornography. For men, it's under 30, it's pushing 80% now. It's a huge issue in our church. And, it's amazing just how much pushback you get to this idea of pastors leaning into this topic. And, I've been asking myself, well, why is that? Why are they so reticent to bring this topic up if it's where so many people are at and where so many marriages are struggling with? And, there's got to be a reason behind it. So I want to just throw out 3 sort of things just for your thinking that I think could factor into it. I'm sure there's more, but bear with me as I give 3 quick reasons that I thought about on my walk yesterday about why we don't want to talk about this or lean into this. Here's the first one. The idea of sexual brokenness doesn't fit with our brand. I've spoken a lot about the idea of shiny church before, and the product that we want to offer people is a successful life. We want to offer the image of, if you come to our church, you will, your marriage will get back together, your life will get back together, your problems will go away if you join yourselves to our successful program. And highlighting people's sexual struggles kind of messes with the feng shui of that great shiny church brand. Recently I heard something that kind of horrified me. Now I recognize I'm an old fart, I'm a baby boomer, and my son just shakes my head. And I heard on a church leaders podcast about this thing called face tuning. And I was like, say what? And I asked my son about it. And he kind of patted me on the head and says, Dad, like you don't get it. He says, like I was familiar with auto tuning. And, I was horrified when he told me that, for example, American Idol uses auto tuning. I just felt like, well, that's just wrong. That's fraudulent, and I just felt like I had been cheated all those years that I watched American Idol with my daughter. But what I'd heard on this podcast was that face tuning is an algorithm that now people who are on the platform, they put themselves through, or their worship people through, so it fits their brand. Branding is not now just using the same fonts or the same colors on your website and throughout your church. Now it can even include things like changing imperfections on how people look. And I'm going, well, obviously churches don't do that. And this guy said, well, actually it's being used more than you realize. And I was just going, say what? And then I started thinking, I've always been kind of really sensitive about my skinny arms. And so I'm thinking, okay, can I do some body tuning? I would love to look like Jason Momoa, when I'm speaking next Sunday. So, with these big arms and tattoo, so I'm really going to kind of fit into this thing next week. And I want to look like Jason Momoa on next Sunday when I speak. But the whole idea is, what is our brand? Do we need whiter teeth? Do we need a better look? Well, I think our brand that we offer to people is success. Join yourselves to our shiny, successful church, and you will be shiny and successful. You go, well, that's I don't know if that's true of church. Here's an example, but it's sometimes more subtle than that. A friend of mine joined a fairly large church and came on staff, and he had some real sexual brokenness in his past that had caused problems, but he still had the call of God on his life, and he still had a lot of ministry skills, and he was hired. And, and he was pretty honest when he was hired about what his struggles had been. And he was told basically, I really wouldn't lead with that, or that's not really something that we want you to talk about as a leader in this church. And I'm going, well, why is that? Because, that's not, and it was kind of put as, well, that's not the first thing we want people to think about you. And you know what? It's really not something that is going to fit with kind of the, whatever it is. It's that subtle pressure to look good, to be shiny, to have that crest white strip look to our lives. And all of that just creates the message in our churches. If you're not put together, you need to hide it. So pastors intentionally or subtly or unconsciously say, you know what? We don't want to highlight people's brokenness. Sure, maybe 10 years ago, if you were with the Hells Angels and living in a Mormon commune, whatever, that's one thing. I don't know why I picked on the Mormons, but but the point is, but if it's still something which is a regular part of the daily part of your struggle, well, you know what? Let's we don't really want to go there. We want 10 steps for how to have a better marriage, a great sex life, and wonderfully well-heeled, raised kids. That's something that we could be proud of about as our church to offer the community. So all of that is, I think pastors don't lean into it because it doesn't fit with the brand. Here's a second one, and I've heard this, and I've sometimes felt this as well. If we talk about people's brokenness and struggles, it makes us feel like pastors that we're somehow doing a bad job of discipling people. I don't know if you ever had the experience where you hear a couple in another church, maybe they might have been elders, they might have been pastors, they might have been whatever, and they split up, or something bad happens to them, and you kind of think, gee, well, what was wrong with what they were teaching in that church? Or weren't they discipling people? And we sometimes think if people are going off the rails or falling or experiencing the brokenness or messiness of life, somehow it shows that we as pastors didn't do a very good job in our preaching and teaching and discipling of followers of Jesus. And I don't know, if I look at the story of Jesus, I see all sorts of broken, messed up people who were attracted to him. So I think you could make a good gospel argument that the presence of God actually leads to having a church of seeing people in all states of array and disarray, where you have people who are struggling followers of Jesus, and you have people who are messed up and their marriages aren't doing well, and you have people who are almost like Dallas Willard. I listened to him today, that are just great models of what you would like to be if you could get your act together, and everything in between. And you go, no, that is a picture of what church is. It's people in all stages of spiritual development. From, we talk so much about wanting a church for seekers, but how about a church for broken seekers? How about a church for broken people who say they found Jesus? I think the full array of people's development actually, if people are messing up or struggling, or marriages are falling apart, or people are coming out as being addicted to this or that, I don't think it shows that we're doing a bad job of discipling people. It just shows that we have a culture where people can bring their needs to God. I heard a comment, I think it's Henry Nouwen that talked about the wounded healer. And I love the concept maybe that I want to be a wounded healer who is following the wounded healer. Because, Jesus is our wounded healer. He was a person who was wounded for our transgressions. So I don't think the fact that people are messing up or bad things are happening shows that we are doing a bad job of discipling people. I think the opposite. I think it shows that we're creating a culture. Now, obviously, we should look at our teaching, and this whole podcast is to talk about welcoming in people in their struggles, including their sexual struggles, making space and room for it as part of what it looks like to become followers of Jesus. Next week, when I speak on, lusting after, if you commit lust in your heart, that whole passage. Well, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about shame. We're going to talk about porn. We're going to talk about some of those things. And if you think I'm just BSing you, I'll throw out my sermon that I put up next week, which was for Sunday morning, to try to model it is okay to talk about these things. Well, here's the last reason why I think pastors lay low on these areas. They don't talk about them. And this is, I think, if stats show, is probably a reason which is more real than we think. And that is this: the enemy has something on you. There was a recent political story of did a foreign government have something on the president? I don't know if that was the case or not, but that was just one of the favorite things that people like to say. But here's the point. I know I don't want the enemy to have something on me. The enemy is, of course, known as our accuser. The enemy is known as somebody who is constantly reminding us of how we've messed up and how if we push into something, we're going to be exposed for the fraud that he tells us that we are. So if you're a pastor and you, like the stats would say, many of us are occasionally or regularly dipping into porn or fantasy or masturbation or whatever it is, and that's part of our secret journey. And then someone comes and says, hey, why don't you talk more about sexuality? Or why don't you talk about that? We don't want to be exposed for the hypocrite that people would think we are. And so somebody might say to us, if we talk about these topics, somebody might ask us, or our wife might say to us, well, when was the last time you struggled with looking at porn? And that's the question we don't want to answer. So it's just better if we stay far, far away from it, because we don't want the incongruence of our own life to be exposed. I don't want the enemy to be able to push me down and control me by the lack of healing and growth in my life. And really, that's the whole purpose of this podcast. The entire purpose of this podcast is to help you in a safe place begin to come out of the shadows, begin to come out of the ambiguity of what's going on in your life, to learn to walk out of the shame, develop some kindness and curiosity about your story, and begin to say, okay, how do I begin with the grace and help of God to experience healing? I'm not saying you have to leave ministry. I didn't leave ministry, but I did learn to be authentic and to grow through these things. So, a lot of that is some reasons, just kind of riffing off the top of my head, why I think pastors lay low, why churches lay low on some of these topics. Next Sunday, I get to speak on it, so maybe I'll throw that up next Sunday. And here is to a great week. I just pray for God's protection around you in these crazy COVID times. I was supposed to meet with a pastor this morning, and they found out they have COVID, no taste, no smell. And, it was like, I'm so sorry I couldn't meet with you this morning. So I totally get it. So here's again to God's protection and blessing. Let's walk into the light together and continue on this path of light. So here we go, and we will see you all next week.